Hi, I'm Tim Foden. I'm a partner with Boies, Schiller, Flexner, based in the London office. I handle disputes on behalf of mining companies, usually against sovereign states.
Tim, good to see you, sir. Thanks for joining us today. We are keen to learn a bit more about what you guys can do for companies when they sometimes find themselves in a bit of a predicament. So, do you specialize in any particular jurisdiction?
No, I don't. I specialize in resource nationalism, effectively. If a country runs into a problem that is guided by principles of resource nationalism, whether that's in Poland, Tanzania, West Africa, in French-speaking Africa, and what we refer to as the Coup Belt down to Peru, and in particular Mexico, we operate all around the world. The guiding principle or the sort of unifying characteristic of our clients is that they have run into issues with the state. Those issues could be electorally guided, or they could be, frankly speaking, more greedy motives behind the newly installed leaders of a state. We're there to help a company either extricate themselves from that predicament through negotiation, or if that doesn't yield a result, bring a claim against that state under a treaty network called bilateral and multilateral investment treaties that exist between the home countries of our clients and the states in question where their assets lay. So I've been doing that now for 15 years, and we've had quite a extraordinary track record over the past 3 years or so in respect to bringing those sorts of claims on behalf of mining companies based in Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom.
And you find yourself doing this in countries which do have, a sensible mining code, and or are you the kind of port of last call?
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, a lot of these states have mining codes that are in many ways predicated upon frameworks set up in, for instance, West Australia. That's what we saw in Tanzania. But those codes typically have a genesis in a previous, more stable political milieu, which then changed, sometimes through electioneering, sometimes through this sort of upswell and populist activity that we've seen over the past few years. Typically, we are treated as a last call. I think increasingly over the past 2 or 3 years, we've had clients engage us earlier with a view towards ensuring that they might try to avoid the worst of it. And where we're not able to help them avoid that outcome, of course, we are on at an early stage in order to try to bring a claim. But yeah, of course, there are many instances where I meet clients who say things like, I hope I never have to see you again. Or, I never thought that I'd end up spending more time with you than I would with the company geologist. But that's the situation that we're in. And we try to make it as least painful as possible on companies that really want to get on with exploring and developing assets, not hanging out with lawyers like myself.
Right, obviously, and time is money, and lost opportunity cost is money, and it's all money. Are you very selective with the cases that you take on, or do you feel that most companies have a very good chance of winning because of what I say, your interpretation of the law?
We're pretty selective, I have to say. There's a number of reasons for that. Oftentimes we're working with junior companies that aren't sitting around on a pile of cash. So if they have to bring a claim, they're going to need someone else to pay for it. Now, our firm does work on a contingency, no win, no fee basis, and sometimes we operate that way, but more often than not, we are marrying that company with specialist third-party litigation financiers. And if they don't have a good claim, I'm never going to be able to get those financiers to give us the money to do the claim. And what's more, I can shoot my credibility with those financiers if I keep bringing them cases that are effectively dogs. So we are selective. That said, there are events that happen in certain jurisdictions that yield multiple good claims in every instance, and we can look at it and determine very quickly whether we'd be able to A, get it financed, and B, we can win it. And that is the big difference between, for instance, us and our competitors. We are trial lawyers at heart. I was once called a corporate ambulance chaser, but we only take on the cases that we think we can win, and we had developed very early on our case theory and our narrative for how we're going to bring that case to a successful conclusion in front of 3 international arbitration tribunal members.
So most cases have been pre-vetted twice. Once by, I guess, the financiers, and 2 by yourselves. You're not going to take on a no win, no fee basis any old project. So are you saying that should be indicative to the other side how serious your intent is?
Yeah, 100%. It's funny, states often look at the involvement of third-party finance as propagating claims that might otherwise not have merit. That is a particularly uncommercial view of that space. These are lenders like any other bank, and they lend money where they think they're going to get money back because they do so on a non-recourse basis. If they're lending my client money, they expect a return or that money is out the door. So they want to know that the case can win, and they want to know that they've got lawyers on their side that can win the case. Most financiers in that space tend to say that they invest in lawyers, not in cases. And we've got a good track record in that respect.
Okay, let's need some examples to help people understand the sort of extent and the breadth of what companies like you do. Because we're talking, so I'd like to talk about companies who are going up against federal governments or state or provincial, but nevertheless, people with an infinite amount of money to spend doing what they think is right. So maybe give us an example of something you've been up to recently.
Our track record of success over the past 6 years or so really starts in many respects with a company that is now called GreenX, formerly called Prairie, where we obtained an award that is being subject to challenge in 2 different judicial systems against Poland for the expropriation of something called the Jan Karski coal project. And we won an award there, I believe, $331 million against Poland for that expropriation. And if you take that case, there's sort of a straight line between a number of other successes that we've had and where we sit right now with respect to our case portfolio. So we've also had 3 different successes against the United Republic of Tanzania. We just last week, or 2 weeks ago, I should say, played an important role in obtaining an award against Peru on behalf of a TSX-listed company called Lupaka. And more recently, we've launched a number of different proceedings against states. We launched last week a case against Montenegro on behalf of a company called Tara Resources. And a few months ago, we launched a proceeding against Morocco on behalf of a company called Emerson PLC in respect of a potash project. Potash is a pretty hot commodity at the moment for state involvement because of the various geopolitics behind that particular mineral. And its fertilizer impacts. And we're in the process of having the arbitral appointments all put into place for that case to form the arbitral tribunal.
Okay, so if you're operating in Peru, Poland, Morocco, are you following the law of those countries, or is there some sort of international law that applies?
We are operating under international law. There is a network of treaties that has been in place since the 1950s that protect foreign investment, typically in developing countries, but those treaties work both ways. And they protect the investment of companies from jurisdiction A, let's say Canada, in making investments in jurisdiction B. In this instance, we'll talk about Peru. And it doesn't matter whether there are a number of intermediary holding companies in place, so long as the capital in some way or another is originating in Canada and finds its way into the investment in Peru, there is protection for that investor under that set of treaties. Now, that doesn't mean that local law or Peruvian law in this example doesn't play any role. It plays a crucial role. Because what we are typically claiming in respect of, and I do say typically, there are considerably important exceptions to that, is a situation in which a sovereign has bent, or in some cases even broken, its own law, whether that's provisions of its own mining code or administrative law, in order to deny some kind of permit, license, or concession to one of our clients. And what we're looking for is to see, did the government act in some kind of patently arbitrary manner in order to ensure that this project could not go forward. And typically, what you're seeing is a very public story where we can see that the country is in the throes of, say, resource nationalist crusade backed by an election, or some other means of favoring, for instance, state-owned companies. And that is the obvious subtext to this entire dispute. But then all of a sudden, the things at the administrative, regional, municipal, legal levels start to go a bit fishy. That is where we know we've got a good claim. Now, earlier you asked me, how do you know it's a good case? How do you get these people interested? Well, we don't just look to see whether there's been some kind of breach of local law or even then breach of the international law. We need to see that the company in question has a sound damages case, that it meets the jurisdictional criteria of the treaties that I just described to you, that it's got a good group of people that were likely to bring this project forward and therefore would serve as decent witnesses should they have to serve as witnesses when we do the case. And lastly, if you win, is the country that we're suing going to pay? And that's crucial. When you take those things together, we know whether we've got a good case that's effectively bankable by one of the financiers that I described earlier, and whether we can win it. And whether you can win it and then get paid, because it's no good to anyone if you get one of these awards, which are enforceable anywhere around the world, frankly speaking. But you take that award somewhere to enforce, say it's in New York City, and the country in question doesn't have any funds to enforce against. So when we look at all of those things, that's how we know we've got a good case. And the damages point of it, that's also crucial. The financiers need to know that A, there's considerable amount of sunk costs that have gone into the project. If you haven't spent any money to develop a asset, chances are a tribunal and therefore a financier isn't going to be particularly interested in your claim. They don't want to see sort of carpetbaggers come into this. And B, that you've got some good story about why you would be entitled to a considerable amount of damages. Say that your project was on the cusp of production, and therefore you're in the realm of seeking to get the NPV value of that mine, albeit with a considerably higher discount rate than most mining companies would apply. Or say you've spent a lot of money in the exploration, but you're not on the cusp of production. Then the damages case looks different, but can look really good. If you spend a lot of money doing that, we can often argue that you should be awarded compensation in a way that reflects that effort, with something that we often refer to as the exploration multiplier. So you're taking the sunk costs and you're putting a multiple on top of them, and that's where your damages will often come out at, plus interest. So when you take those figures and you add them all together, you can hit pretty high numbers, even if you, say, wouldn't be in the situation that a Valmin or a SimVol reporting code would characterize your asset as one where you would apply a DCF valuation.
Okay, so that kind of valuation is, I guess it's kind of arbitrary in terms of who's made the best argument either side, because you can put you're going to go for a high number. They'll want to either not give you any money or go for a lower number at some point in the discussion. How long do these discussions, how much does jostling go on for?
So it's about 18 months of written pleadings exchanged between the parties. Then a few months later, we have, in all of these cases, an in-person evidentiary hearing that lasts usually 1 to 2 weeks, and then you're waiting around for an award. And that's where the arguments you put to the tribunal will be determined, and the award is our arbitration fancy word for what we call a judgment. And in that award, they will assess the arguments, to come back to your point, on whether DCF should be applicable, and if so, what input should be brought into that DCF. But I'll tell you right now, if your mentality here as an advocate is to always go for DCF, even when the sort of reporting codes would suggest to you that it's inappropriate, that's a really good way to get a tribunal not to believe anything you say, let alone what you're claiming for in damages. So one of the things that I always have a very tough discussion with clients about is, okay, how advanced were we? Can I argue without a red nose in front of this tribunal that we should be asking for a DCF? Or should we do something like a market approach or a costs approach. Because I'm not going to destroy all credibility that I've developed with tribunals over the years by arguing for something that my client isn't entitled to, just because they think that if we go high, that it might just get discounted a little bit. That's not the way these tribunals work. They'd rather be told the truth, and then they can figure it out for themselves, rather than you try to, it's not a jury trial in the United States where if you ask for $1 billion, you might get the $40 million you're actually asking for. That's not how we do things. Some of my opponents do. That's not how I will do it.
So how should we interpret it? If, say, the company is awarded a sum of money, have you ever seen a scenario where the company said, no, we just want the concession back? Would they rather take the money and trot off to another jurisdiction and start on a new project?
So I see that a lot, but I see it in very short engagements that I have with clients. That is a scenario where I am hired to try and get them that result, get us that concession back. And we have a number of ways of sitting down with, ministers from the mines or other, people from the Ministry of Finance to deploy a leverage, a lot of the leverage that is often gained from the international legal framework that protects our clients, to say, hey, you need to give this back to them. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a 3-year lawsuit. You might find yourself being cross-examined on YouTube, like a lot of my opponents in Tanzania and other jurisdictions have. And we'll still win and they'll get paid. So if you give us the concession back now, we can all walk away. Maybe even my client will make some concession to you in exchange for that concession. But what you won't get if you hire me to do the dispute is your concession back. In all likelihood, at that point, you are just looking for monetary damages. Tribunals that are formed under these treaties are not really equipped to hand out what is known in the legal world as specific performance, which is, oh, you're entitled to that, give it back to them. They'd rather give out money. That's what they're really there to do.
Do you find that, having been through a process like this, there are jurisdictions which are less likely to want to enter a similar sort of situation again, or is it very much, whichever government is in power at that time, they'll start off and kick off as if they think they're gonna win? I mean, I'm trying to understand your reputation in the market, I guess.
Yeah, look, there are states that don't like it when I turn up in correspondence. There are states that have had a tough time in arbitration or are looking to genuinely turn over a new leaf and view these cases as a blight on their efforts to obtain further investment. And then there are states that are what we called in Philadelphia, where I grew up, scofflaws. They just don't care. And you can not care, but you've got to pay. And if you don't pay, we can take that award I referenced earlier to any place where you as a state have assets, and we can start seizing those assets. And, if you look at the example of Venezuela, for instance, they very clearly took many, many mines, many, many gas concessions and oil concessions. They were open about it, and they paid for a long time until they couldn't pay anymore. And then companies like the fund Elliott started enforcing against particular assets. Same with a company called Crystalex. That's what we do there. We hope it never comes to that. But to come back to your question, Matthew, yes, of course, there are states that say, oh, okay, all right. Boies, Schiller, Flexner's turned up. We know what these guys are after. Let's have a sit down. Let's have a meeting. We might be able to work something out. Of course, there are other states that just ignore us.
Interesting times. Busy at the moment?
We're incredibly busy at the moment. Like I mentioned earlier, we're launching proceedings. We've launched proceedings against Morocco on behalf of a company called Emerson. We're very active recently in Ethiopia. As I mentioned earlier, there's Montenegro. We're getting ready to do a hearing in Washington, D.C. in October on behalf of a company called Silver Bowl. And we've not long ago put in our first major written submission against Mexico by another TSX listed company called Almaden. Those are just a few of the cases. There's a fair number of them that I can't speak about, including some additional actions in Poland. Poland went through a phase where they had invited everyone to come in to develop their coal sector, and then a party called Law and Justice came in, and they wanted to keep it very much in the realm of state-owned mining companies, and that's led to a number of different claims. Those are the areas that we've been pretty active in. And then the Francophone coup belt, we're also operating on behalf of a company called Sarama. We've just had the tribunal fully constituted in that case. I've got a meeting, a sort of preliminary hearing with that tribunal this week. So yeah, we're really busy. We've developed quite a reputation in Perth, Toronto, and Vancouver, not just for being able to assist companies, find them finance if they need to, but then win the case. And so the days of me trooping up the pavement in St. George's Terrace in Perth are not as frequent as they used to be, because we're getting more calls from those companies now instead of having to go knock on their door. But we still knock on doors anyway. When we get the sense that something is going to happen in a particular jurisdiction, we are right out to our network to try and make sure that they're doing everything to preserve their rights. Because another thing that mining companies don't often appreciate is that what they say to the market when things start to go wrong can be the petard that they hoist themselves on. If a company is saying to the world in its press releases, this is all fine, actually, what the state has done here is not that bad, and then they end up having to bring a claim, all those press releases are going to get waved in their face. So we get, increasingly brought in earlier to advise companies during this stage. For instance, a jurisdiction that we're looking at very closely right now is Ecuador, which has just placed a considerable fee on every hectare of land owned by mining companies, ostensibly to combat illegal mining. But if you've got to pay a considerable amount of money, I believe in some instances $25 per hectare, and you're a junior exploration company that only has the money in your bank account to run drill rigs, good luck.
Yeah. Well, Tim, I appreciate you making the time and sort of sharing with us. So it gives us a bit of an insight into what happens when things go wrong in country. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
No, thanks so much, Matthew. Really appreciate it.